Thank you to the National Park Service volunteers. Whether it's sharing stitches and stories, or bringing history to life, or teaching trade skills, or instructing the addle-addle. One of the most valuable resources at our nation's national parks is our volunteers' time. They are experts in fission.
We add in the first neutron.
They staff the live cams at Yellowstone. They are explorers, stewards of the land, and citizen scientists. They share art in New Bedford, at Herbert Hoover, and in the Everglades. They are first-timers, underwater divers, information providers, fossil finders. They get the best seat in the house and tell tales on the rails. They are you and me, thousands of us, just sharing a little time and making a big difference. Volunteer at a national park site near you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's event, Stories of Service, Empowering Youth and Young Adults to be the Future Face of Volunteering in National Parks. I see that we already have a few folks welcoming and introducing themselves in the chat. We're so glad that you're here, and I think that we're going to have a really great event today. This webinar is co-hosted by the National Park Service Youth Programs Division and the National Park Service Volunteers in Parks Program in partnership with the National Park Foundation. And today we're going to get to hear from youth and young adults who volunteer in national parks, as well as from some of the National Park staff and partners who support them. My name is Sherry Orr, and I'll be moderating today's event. I am the nationwide Volunteers in Parks Program Manager here at the National Park Service, and every time I see that video, I get chills. I have the honor of leading our volunteer program, which engages nearly 300,000 people each year. They give their time and their talent to our nation's parks, and we are incredibly grateful. One of the most crucial groups of our volunteers is our youth and young adults, and that's what we'll be focusing on today. I think the timing of today's event is pretty spectacular for a couple of reasons. As we enter the holiday season and the traditional season of giving in our country, it's the perfect time for us to talk about how we can give back to some of the places that mean so much to each of us, our nation's parks. And we also want to recognize that tomorrow is Veterans Day. This is a day where we can recognize and honor all of those who have served our country in the armed forces. We'll take some time later in our event to hear from a veteran who's actually now serving his country in a new way by volunteering in our nation's parks. And to our event facilitator, you can actually pull those down. Yeah, we'll use those in just a bit. So tomorrow with Veterans Day, we do want to be able to recognize veterans who volunteer. And I'm so excited for our veteran speaker to be able to share some perspectives with all of you. And so with those themes in mind, youth and young adults volunteering, the season of giving, and Veterans Day in mind, I want to tell you a little bit about what our event will look like and do some housekeeping before we dive in. We'll start by hearing from my event co-hosts from the youth program and from the National Park Foundation, as well as a current National Park Service employee who works with some young volunteers on some pretty unique projects. And then we'll get to, I think, my favorite part of the event, a panel discussion made up of people who volunteer in national parks. These panelists represent a really diverse group, high school students and college students, Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, the YMCA, some of our partner organizations, and as I said, a special veteran speaker. And so after we hear from our panelists, we'll open with some Q&A where you can actually ask our speakers your questions. So with that in mind, before we dive in, let me go over just a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions and you're joining the event on either Zoom or Facebook, you can submit your questions at any time. On Zoom, submit them in the chat box, and on Facebook, submit them as a comment on the live stream. We'll be keeping an eye on both. If possible, please include your name, your title if you have one, and the organization you represent if you are with a nonprofit, a partner, the National Park Service. Having that information helps us know how best to answer your question. And if you want to ask your question to a specific speaker, just mention that, and we'll do our best to target it to them. I'm going to try and get us through as many questions as we can in the time we have, so we will try and go through them quickly at the end. This event is being recorded, and it will be made available on our official event page following the event. The link to the event page will be posted in the chat box so that you know where to find the recording. And just to make sure we can reach even more people, as I said, the event's being live streamed on Facebook, and the link to our Facebook page is also in the chat box. And as we shared in the chat already, we have turned on auto closed captioning for accessibility, and that live captioning is available at the link in the chat. If needed, you can turn off that feature by using your control panel to hide the subtitles. And with all of that housekeeping out of the way, let's dive in. I'm going to start by allowing us to hear from my fellow event hosts. And so with that, I would like to invite George McDonald, Chief of Youth Programs and Experience Services Program Division at the National Park Service, to join me on screen. Hello, George. So George, you've been with the National Park Service for a few years now, and you have played a pivotal role in increasing our ability to engage youth and young adults in service, including, I believe you helped launch the Youth Intern Program here back in 2009, if I've got my facts straight. And I know that we're grateful to your leadership and excited to hear your perspectives on our topic today. So why don't you share just a little bit about the youth program, George, and how volunteering intersects so well with your team's work?
Sure, and thank you so much. I've been with the National Park Service for well over 20 years, so time has actually been flying by, but it feels like I've just been there for just a few years because I've been having so much fun. But what I do as the chief of the Youth Programs Division and the Experience Services Program is that we have a focus on providing employment and volunteer service opportunities for youth and young adults. And we define young adults as people between the ages of 18 and 30. And we also have special consideration for veterans 35 and under who are separating from active duty military service and transitioning into civilian life. And what our real purpose is to get as many Americans, as many people involved in the protection of our natural and cultural resources on our federal public lands. These are our shared lands. Everyone in our country has ownership in these lands. And we, as National Park Service staff, we're custodians for this land, but we cannot do all the protection and provide all the tender, loving care that these lands require without the able assistance of volunteers, tens, hundreds of thousands of volunteers that volunteer in our national parks every year. And it's really important also for young people to get involved in developing a stewardship ethic, a resource stewardship ethic, and good values when it comes to providing service to their communities, to their family, and to their country. And what better way to do that than to volunteer in national parks? And I want to thank the National Park Foundation again, because they raise money in addition to the money that the taxpayers provide to the National Park Service to protect these precious lands. They also raise additional funding that helps to augment what we actually do. So we're in exciting times. I am pumped up about this webinar, and I also want to thank you, Sherry, for your outstanding leadership. I could not ask for a better partner.
Thanks, George. And speaking of partners, that gives me a perfect segue. I next want to introduce Sarah Unz, who is the Director of Community Partnerships at the National Park Foundation. In this role, Sarah engages partners in support of our nation's parks. And Sarah, we are so excited to be able to partner together on this event with you and to have a representative of one of our other partners on. So some of these organizations that I know you work with include our nonprofit philanthropic parks partners, some of our volunteer groups, cooperating associations, service corps, public allies. Thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the foundation, your work with partners, and how interested volunteers can serve with those partners?
Thanks so much. Thank you, Sherry, and also thank you, George. Your leadership on this event has been tremendous. Your entire team has just put together such a lovely show. And you've been so thoughtful throughout this entire process. I'm very excited to be part of today's event, highlighting the important role volunteers play. So thank you for your partnership. As Sherry mentioned, my name is Sarah Unz, and I'm the Director of Community Partnerships at the National Park Foundation. NPF is the official charitable partner to the National Park Service, and we provide protection and connection to parks and people through a variety of programs and projects. We work in lockstep with the National Park Service and the partner community. And that partnership ensures that our parks can reach their fullest potential and connect with as many people as possible. The Community Partnerships team specifically focuses on supporting the hundreds of partners across the country. We define those partners as private organizations that support the National Park System through a combination of direct and indirect support. The National Park Foundation, along with the National Park Service and the leaders of the partner community, commissioned a report on the landscape of partners that support national park sites. From this report, we know a lot about the community of partners. It is very robust and it's growing. There's over 450 partners supporting national park sites. We know that partners provide over $400 million in estimated direct and in-kind support to the National Park Service. Partners engage with over 100,000 volunteers annually, and that 75% of park partners engage volunteers with their national park sites. From this, I think we can safely say that volunteering plays a key role in how partners support the National Park Service. And as Sherry mentioned, there's a great example of how the National Park Foundation and the partner community work together, and that's illustrated through our close partnership with the Ice Age Trail Alliance. This partnership has manifested in many different ways and includes capacity building efforts at the Alliance, connecting kids to the Ice Age Trail, and supporting the Alliance's volunteer efforts. You'll hear more from our partner and my friend, Luke Loberdans today, the Director of Philanthropy at the Ice Age Trail Alliance, during the panel discussion. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Luke and all the other panelists on how volunteerism plays a role, not only in their life, but also at their organization. So thank you, Sherry, and I will turn it back over to you. And I'm just thrilled to be here today.
Thanks, Sarah. And that's actually a great opening. I'm now going to spend just a couple of minutes telling everyone a little bit more about the volunteer program. Since volunteering is our main focus for today, we'll spend just a few minutes on some background information here. So can I invite our event facilitator to pull up those quick slides we have for this? We thought it might be helpful to get a visual. And while you're doing that, let me just say, we've already mentioned it, but there are nearly 300,000 volunteers who donate more than 6.5 million hours of service every year across the National Park Service. This program has been in existence for 50 years. And on average, the value of the volunteer service that we receive is worth more than $185 million. And this is truly, it represents that volunteers serve in nearly every discipline, unit, and career field within the National Park Service. You know, sometimes they support one-time events, sometimes they work side by side with our staff for years. And overall, volunteers are such a valuable human resource that really strengthens our workforce. And so because volunteers are such an essential part of our nation's park and help us meet our mission, particularly for the youth and young adults joining today, you might be asking, well, why should I volunteer? What are some of the reasons I should get involved? I came up with just a few quick reasons. If you want to go to the next slide. First, this is your chance to join a movement and be a part of a community. As I said, there are over 300,000 people who engage directly in volunteer service with the National Park Service each year. And as Sarah just shared, we also work with hundreds of partners who themselves engage volunteers. This is a really exciting way for you to be a part of something really big. Next slide. This is also an incredible opportunity for you to learn something new, to sharpen your skills, and to maybe explore some new career paths. You know, volunteering can be an incredible way to try something that you wouldn't otherwise get a chance to do. And for those of you looking to build your resume, volunteering in a national park can actually be a great way to do that. Two of our speakers today actually found their current jobs through volunteering. We'll hear a little bit more about that in a bit. We have at the National Park Service staff who work in some really interesting careers: education, interpretation, historic preservation, public health, library and museum management, historic records, and more. So volunteering in a national park might be a way to explore a career that you wouldn't have even thought was possible. Next slide. And kind of on that note, volunteering can be a really neat way to make you stand apart from your peers. That might be for, a list of high school accomplishments, maybe a college application, or maybe your next job application. And I think it's also worth mentioning that sometimes it's required for schools or even colleges for you to complete a certain amount of volunteering. And if you need to volunteer, maybe say 75 hours by your senior year, volunteering at a national park is a pretty epic way to get that accomplishment or that requirement met. And then finally, let me go to my last slide. It's worth mentioning that there can be some really neat perks to volunteering, especially in a national park. This is first and very obvious. It's rewarding to feel good about the contributions that you're making to something that matters. I think one of the common things I hear from our volunteers is that sense of accomplishment and purpose behind what they're doing. And second, I know from many of the volunteers that I get to speak to that they like having that insider's perspective on their favorite national park. Knowing how things work and who gets them done, getting to celebrate accomplishments and milestones alongside the staff in the park, and kind of just getting that inside peek behind the curtain. All of that can be its own reward. And then finally, I would be remiss not to mention that people who volunteer for 250 hours or more in national parks are qualified to receive a free annual pass. It's a small way that we can share a token of our appreciation, and actually it's a perk that even staff don't get. So I think that that's another exciting reason to get involved. If you go to the next slide, let me just mention, if you're wondering how to get started and how to make the most of your volunteer service, I get this question a lot. How can I actually make my volunteer service impactful? How can I actually make sure that I'm making a difference? There are really 3 ways that you can do that. I think first, make sure that you're not just volunteering at a park. Make sure that you're volunteering with the park. The best way you can do that is by partnering with the park staff, asking, what does your park need? What are you working on? And then trying to think of your volunteer experience as a way that you can help meet those needs. I think the second thing is planning early. Sometimes projects need a couple of months of planning time, particularly if you're doing a big project like a few of our speakers that you'll hear from later. The things that take the most impact also take the most planning. So building in that planning time can be really helpful. If you don't have time to plan, considering adding yourself to an event that already is happening, maybe like National Public Lands Day or another day of service like Veterans Day, can be a really great way to get involved quickly. And then last, I would just encourage you to consider all the options. I won't go through them here, but there are really neat volunteer projects that happen in a range of experiences at the National Park Service. So even though you might have pictured that you would be cleaning up trash, you should be trying to think through, well, what else might be out there that I'd be interested in learning about and that could be beneficial to the park? And so considering all those various opportunities can really give you a great way to get involved and make a big impact. And finally, one more slide. If our speakers today pique your interest and you want to learn more about volunteering, there are a couple of different ways that you can actually find out more. First, you can find a list of available opportunities at volunteer.gov. You can search for a volunteer event by visiting nps.gov, and you can contact your local national park. And with that, let me transition from our slides to our next speaker, because speaking of your local national park, I want to invite a current National Park Service staff member who works with volunteers, including youth and young adults, on some pretty cool projects to share some of his experiences. So Keith Park, if you can join me on video. Keith is a horticulturalist and an arborist at the John Muir National Historic Site in the San Francisco Bay Area. And he supervised, for example, a couple of Boy Scout of America Eagle Scout projects and a Girl Scout Gold Award project. And again, Keith's kind of non-traditional role isn't necessarily what people would think of when they think of volunteering at the national park. So Keith, why don't you just take a couple minutes to share why you love working with youth and young adult volunteers and the types of neat projects that they have the chance to complete at the parks you work with.
Sure thing. Thank you, Sherry, and thanks everybody who is on this webinar. It's a real pleasure to be invited and have the opportunity to share my experiences with volunteers and youth in my job at the John Muir National Historic Site. I've had the opportunity to work with volunteers almost literally of all ages, from both young and old. I host a weekly landscape volunteer group, which is mostly retired people, but it didn't take very long for really people to find us. Often it's now become pretty common for whenever somebody has inquires with our park about a potential project, they usually send it to me because I guess I've just become the point person for these kinds of projects. And when it first happened, I was new to the job and I kind of like, oh, dude, I don't know how much I can do here. But as I've grown comfortable and kind of into the job, I feel like I've gotten very comfortable with figuring out how to make these things happen for, we'll say, the scout projects. Because sometimes at parks, people just, they don't know or they don't have an idea, but I kind of have this ongoing list of projects and ideas because I know that these opportunities come up from time to time, and I just want to be able to offer something right off the bat. The first scout project that I ever kind of supervised and shepherded through the process was the Girl Scout Gold Award. It was a creek restoration, planting some native vegetation to stabilize a creek bank that runs through our park. It went really well. And, kind of from that experience, I gained the confidence in knowing what I could and couldn't do at the park. And not unimportantly, which has been mentioned, but planning, because as much as it might seem like sometimes these projects can happen really quickly, depending on what it is, especially when you're talking about facilities and landscapes and especially construction type stuff, furniture and whatnot, I think what people don't really understand is that it does take time. So I would really emphasize just give it enough time for the planning in the park to really kind of get comfortable with what's going to happen. But inevitably and invariably in my case, every project has happened. We've done native garden. There was an Eagle Scout did a native garden expansion. We've had additional creek restoration. We had a scout last year do furniture construction based on our site furnishings plan, which most people probably wouldn't realize we have, but we try to have consistency in how things look throughout the park. So that was important. And I also think the value in that is, it's not, I try to look at various, maybe limitations as opportunities, because, somebody might want to just build a bench or a picnic table. Well, that's fine. And that's valuable. But I think it's interesting for people to realize that we actually have these plans in place for the reasons that I described, consistency and character and all that. I always try to emphasize that and not just make it about hammering nails into something, giving people a sense of why we're doing what we're doing and how we're doing it. Most recently, I had a scout help restore an old historic olive orchard, which we believe is probably the oldest olive orchard in the Park Service. And that went really well after it was proposed right at the beginning of the pandemic. And speaking of time, the scout really, he could have just dropped it and moved on. In fact, I think he thought about doing so, but he really, he felt invested in working with our park. And so after about a year and some months, we finally made it happen, following all the protocols, and it went fantastically. Another small story about that project that I found interesting, and I hope the scout did too, was there's a threatened and endangered snake species that inhabits that same area. So I was able to share with the scout and, help him plan around certain times of the year, and also just understanding, we work with Fish and Wildlife on threatened and endangered species and, many other things like that. So it's those little things that I find, you might think of it, scouts or whoever might think of it as maybe a hurdle, but to me, that's really how the work is done. And I think that, for anyone who is interested in that, it's a great opportunity to engage with parks at a deeper level than just say a visitor. And, most people, I know I speak for myself at least, but most people you tend to feel flattered if you take an interest in what it is they're doing. Like in my job, horticulture or historical horticulture, what is that? Well, it's an opportunity for me to explain and talk to people about what it is, what we do, and how it ties in with all divisions, facilities, planning, cultural resources, natural resources, and it really opens that door. So I feel that there's value in that both ways. The parks definitely get something accomplished and created. Hopefully the volunteers and scouts do as well. And the value that the thing that you can't really put your finger on, but it's there, is the engagement with the community. And I highly value that aspect of it. I've actually kept in touch with a couple of the scouts that have gone through, and I find that really valuable. So I think that is really what I find most valuable, is just engaging with the public, because we're public lands. And, these, like George said, these are your lands, and this is everybody's land, and you can enjoy it in any way that you wish. But for me, the magic is really kind of finding out and learning how this job kind of works, and how we really manage the lands kind of behind the scenes. So I knew there was one more thing I want to mention: the networking aspect. Every time we work with youth, I'm the chair of our Parks Youth Committee, so we work with various schools, grade schools, high schools, and I'm always trying to encourage people, especially at the high school level, to network, get to know people like me or whoever at the park, because that can open doors as well. Definitely life is about what you know, but if I'm being honest, as I've gotten older, I've realized that it's also about networking and getting to know people. That can open doors as well. So I would definitely encourage people not to discount that aspect of it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Keith. I think that's a perfect note to end on. I love that you focus so much in sharing your stories about the relationships that are established through volunteering. That was something that I didn't cover, and that's so incredibly true. And I also think the stories that you shared highlighted exactly what I was trying to hit home on, is volunteering with the park in partnership to try and meet a need is really the best way to make sure that your volunteer activity has the most impact possible. So thank you, Keith, for kind of bringing some life to the stats and the general advice that I was giving. I think getting to hear from someone that works with volunteers on the ground is awesome. And with that, I am going to actually introduce us to our volunteer speakers. So I'm going to start by introducing each of our speakers, and then I'll have some targeted questions for each of them. So Natalie Kaminsky is a high school senior in Cincinnati, Ohio. She's going to study architecture in college next year, and she recently completed her Gold Award, which is the highest achievement one can receive in the Girl Scout. And particularly exciting, since the National Park Service just recently celebrated Bat Week. Natalie's project involved working with the bat population at the Charles Young Buffalo Soldiers National Monument. Natalie, I'd love for you to join me on camera and for you to tell us a little bit about how you got involved in volunteering with the National Parks, a little bit about your project and what a Gold Award is, and how you came to select a project focused on bats. Go ahead, Natalie, just take about 2 minutes.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Sherry, and thanks for having me here. So being in Girl Scouts since kindergarten, I've completed many small service projects with my troop, including the Bronze and Silver Awards. So my troop's Bronze Award was centered on helping animals at a local shelter where we made dog toys and treats. And then our Silver Award was focused on helping the homeless. So we made homeless mats and served dinner at a homeless center. So I wanted to complete my Girl Scout journey with the Gold Award. I first got in touch with the National Park Service through social media. I saw there was need for help at the Charles Young property since they're in the process of restoring the park. So I had many calls figuring out what was needed and then how I could configure it into a Gold Award project. And then I later submitted my project proposal to Girl Scouts. And after a lot of planning and a lot of time, there are now 4 bat houses at the Charles Young National Park. So part of this process was a building and installation day. This was where my team, consisting of Girl Scouts from my troop and a younger troop, my family, and then staff from the National Park Service, they all helped to put together the houses and install them. So the impact from my project will happen over the next few years. And because it can take up to a year for bats to find the houses, and then each house can hold from 50 to 100 bats.
That is so cool, Natalie. And I don't know if I told you earlier that I used to work at Girl Scouts. And so I found your project particularly meaningful and really cool. And next, I'm going to invite Tyler to join me on screen. Tyler Rush received his Eagle Scout badge with the Boy Scouts of America at Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. Tyler's a sophomore at the University of Utah. And before he became a college student, he was a high school student and a Boy Scout. So Tyler, your volunteer project was actually impacted by a devastating wildfire. So tell us just a little bit about your project, what an Eagle Scout Award is, and how you redirected your project after the wildfire changed your plans.
Sure. So I'll start with the Eagle Award for those who don't know. It's the biggest award in all of Boy Scouts. It's kind of the culmination of everything you learn in Boy Scouts up to that point. So you take all of your skills, leadership, interpersonal skills, and then apply it to finding a project and then going back and forth with the beneficiary and planning a project to help out your community. And at the end of it, it's about, I'd say fastest, probably a 6 to 7 month journey from start to finish. At the end of that, you're awarded with your Eagle Award, which is the highest rank that an Eagle Scout can achieve, or a Boy Scout can achieve. My project I did at Paramount Ranch out of Agora Hills, California. And for those of you who maybe aren't so familiar with Paramount Ranch, it's a historic Western town. Many movies and TV shows were filmed there, such as American Sniper. They had a few scenes there, Tom Sawyer, and Westworld is some of the most popular shows. I planned my project with the National Park Service in around 2018. And unfortunately, the California wildfires swept through and burned the majority of my project to the ground. And so I had to replan. There were 2 buildings that remained, an old church and a train station. And so I was able to kind of replan and reposition the focus of my project and just beautifying, restoring, and making the park safer for all visitors.
Thanks, Tyler. I think your story is a perfect exemplification of the flexibility required in working with the National Park Service in general, but especially in volunteering. So thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Next, I'm going to introduce Luke. Luke Heilman is a first-year college student. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm going to actually go to Daphne first, and then I'll come back to you, Luke. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Daphne Short. Daphne is a junior at the University of Texas. She previously served as an intern with the National Park Service through the Student Conservation Association. I bet we have some other SCA alums on the call, so feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. And what I thought was really neat, Daphne, was you spent this summer working as a YMCA camp leader at Reconstruction Era National Historic Park, and you helped 150 students connect to national parks. So tell us just a little bit about your experience with the YMCA and what you learned in that experience.
Thank you, Sherry. Yeah, so my experience was very unique and different. I got to spend 4 months really cultivating a great relationship with these students and the area around them. It's really historic, filled with a very deep culture. We not only did that, though, we spent lots of time focusing on the land, and I got to help the students connect with the idea that they're responsible for like these next generations of how we're going to connect with the earth. And that was a really big part of what we would do. Sorry. So yeah, we would spend time just having fun, doing activities that helped the land, doing activities that connected them to their area. I got involved through the Student Conservation Association. We were able to do lots of stuff. So like some people do trail restoration. I focused a lot on youth. So my experience was a bit different in that I focused mostly on education. But while I was actually at the park and not just with children, I got to connect a lot with the other volunteers, which was so amazing to hear from where they come from, how they got involved, and then to see their impact with other visitors, because the visitor interaction is such a big part of being in the park and making it so much better for them. So it was a really great, well-rounded experience to be able to impact youth, but visitors, and then also meet so many new people that come from many different walks of life.
That is awesome, Daphne. And obviously a big push behind our getting young people, young children, youth, and young adults involved in volunteering is that we believe starting them out young starts them out strong. So thank you for your help to do that. And now I'm going to introduce Luke Heilman. He's a first-year college student in Pennsylvania, and he actually started volunteering on his own as a high school student at the Hopewell Furnace National Historic Site just a couple of years ago. And Luke, you actually did a little bit of everything as a volunteer. You were in the visitor center, you helped with the cultural resources program, you were digitizing historic account book ledgers, and then I think you even managed a fire on the annual fleece cleaning day. So just tell us a little bit about how you got involved. How did you find this opportunity, and what you learned in your experience?
Well, thank you, Sherry. It's an honor to be here. I got started in fall of 2019 when I was a rising junior in high school. And I remember I went to Hopewell Furnace National Historic Site in Pennsylvania, and they were having a celebration. It was the anniversary of the park, and I just saw all of these different volunteers and staff working together, each doing their own different thing. And I knew I wanted to do that. I knew I wanted to volunteer in some capacity. And so I got to talking with some of the staff there, who are some of the friendliest people I've ever met. I wasn't sure how staff would be, because staff are always so friendly to visitors, but they're just as friendly to other volunteers behind the scenes. So I asked about volunteering, and they were very accommodating, and I started working in the visitor center, and I would stand and I would greet visitors. I would give them a pamphlet, direct them around the park, make sure if they have any questions that I would do my best to answer them, or if I couldn't answer them, direct them to somebody who could help them. And from there, I did that for a while, and I eventually was offered a chance to work in the cultural resources department. And there I was able to, as you say, digitize historic account ledgers. So Hopewell Furnace, when it operated, sold its products and documented those sales in account books. And so what the National Park Service is doing is they had a project to digitize them and put them in an archive. So to digitize those physical files, put them on an archival database. And so I got involved with that, thanks to Amanda Sherry, who I know is on the call. So I want to say hello to Amanda. And I did that. That was mostly from home. So I would go in the weekends when I had free time, and I would talk to visitors. And in terms of the activity, stoking a fire, Hopewell has different special events, and one of them is they have sheep on the farm, and what they do is they have a fleece cleaning day where they use historic methods to use the sheared wool from the sheep that they do earlier in the year. And they clean it, but they clean it using historic methods. So they use the big metal cauldron and they heat it over a fire. So I was in charge of heating the fire that day and heating the water that they used to clean the wool, which was really cool, being able to explain to visitors, what I was doing, the intricacies of the process and how it all fit together. And so those were some of my most memorable experiences. And overall, I found the opportunity really, really rewarding. Every time every time I left, I always wanted to come back right away the next weekend. I was just so excited to work with the great people. And it was a really great experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Luke. And I'm just going to echo a comment I just saw in the chat that even getting to listen to all of your stories again, I am so impressed with the young people who are volunteering in our nation's parks and doing such cool projects. I think the fire stoking for Fleece Cleaning Day and that project and historic preservation, there's so many neat projects and substantive projects that people of any age have been able to accomplish in national parks. And we're about halfway through our kind of panel discussion here. So I just wanted to put in a plug. Continue to put your questions in, and we'll get to as many as we can once we get to the Q&A portion. And now with our speaker introductions, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. Our final few speakers are actually help support the volunteer efforts at the National Park Service, but they represent some different angles through which you might get involved with volunteering. I'll have each speaker explain their connection to volunteering as they introduce themselves, starting with Luke Cloberdans. Luke, you started out as a volunteer yourself back in 2001 with the Ice Age Trail Alliance, a partner with the National Park Service. And this group, like so many of our partner organizations, are a really critical system of support for the National Park Service. And you eventually joined the staff of the Ice Age Trail Alliance and got to use your background in your new role. So just tell us in a couple of minutes how you got involved with volunteering and how you see the role of partner organizations in supporting youth and young adults in volunteering and the National Park Service at large.
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today. The picture behind me is, you can see the bridge over my shoulder here. This is the Ice Age National Scenic Trail, one of 11 national scenic trails. And the organization I work for now, the Ice Age Trail Alliance, helps to protect that and create that. So that you can see the map over my other shoulder, and that is the route of our trail. And all across that length, we have thousands of volunteers who come out and work tirelessly to make sure that that route is open so that people can enjoy Wisconsin on a beautiful fall day like the photo depicts. But I really moved to Wisconsin in 2000 and thought, boy, I want to get out. I need to check out some of these spaces, these outdoor spaces. And I found the Ice Age Trail. I was a teacher in a small community north of Madison, and the trail happens to run right through town. And I started looking at this route and imagining what it must be like. So I saw an opportunity to volunteer. I showed up with very little knowledge, skills. I never worked construction or anything like that in my life. And the volunteers at the time said, here, let's move some of these logs and we're going to build a bridge. And I just felt this like rekindling of when I was a kid playing in the sandbox and moving dirt and building something, only it was on this like huge scale. And I remember being so inspired by that and just in feeling that I was actually like doing something more to give back. But then I started at the same time, started wanting to explore that what you see as a yellow line across the state of Wisconsin. And so in 2003, I undertook a through hike of the trail and completed it after 47 days. And that really just made me fall deeply in love with this Ice Age National Scenic Trail, but also the people along the way. And when I came back from that through hike, I was just totally into the volunteer lifestyle. So I would take time off of work. I would travel all over the state, all over the country, helping other trails, and just really started feeling like it was my job to give back because of everything I gained from my personal experience and growth during the hike. And so for the next 10 years, I volunteered in trail building with many of my now closest friends. And I think, you mentioned it earlier, Sherry, it's that community. And Keith mentioned it as well. It's just that camaraderie, that community, and then sitting around the fire at night after a day of schlepping buckets of dirt to build this 24-inch footpath. It just really brought everyone together. And it didn't matter what walk of life we came from. It didn't matter what our socioeconomic status was or any of those things. We were there for a common cause. And there was a really leveling of the playing field that kept me going for 10 years as a volunteer and putting in thousands and thousands of hours. And I never thought then that I'd be sitting where I am today, which is as a staff member of the nonprofit partner, the Ice Age Trail Alliance. And now some of my greatest memories and greatest examples of volunteerism aren't necessarily the stone steps or things that I built, but when we take a busload of kids out and we encourage them to come volunteer. And once you get over the fear of like 80 fourth graders with folding saws and loppers, it really is an amazing group to work with. And seeing these young kids go out and starting them, like you said, really young, and having them go out and realize that, boy, this can be a job. Boy, this can be something that I can do regularly with my family, and watching them continue down that path is probably the part that washes over me the most when I think about volunteerism and what the memories are that I will take away from working with volunteers.
That is awesome. Thank you, Luke. And I'll have another question for you in a moment, but let me introduce quickly our last two speakers. Keith, as we prepare to honor our military through Veterans Day tomorrow, it is my honor to introduce Keith June, who is a 30-year Army veteran and whose career truly took him all around the world. But now, enjoying some well-deserved retirement, Keith has not stopped giving back. In addition to other volunteer roles in the community, he also serves at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial on the National Mall, which is operated by the National Park Service. Keith, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you don't mind just spend a minute or two telling us how you came to volunteer with the National Park Service after such an incredible globetrotting career, and why you believe service to others is important, and maybe any advice you have for the youth and young adults joining today.
Sherry, thank you very much. And I am honored to be here today. I really am. And first, I want to thank veterans and their families as we observe and honor veterans on Veterans Day tomorrow. Yeah, I started volunteering about 5 years ago. It was around the time that I retired from the Army. And I was looking for a way to give back. And throughout my life, and especially my career, the idea of giving back was just really important. And by the way, we didn't cue anything before this, so I'm really inspired by hearing yourself and the previous speaker talk about giving back. But really giving back is just really, really important to me. I volunteer primarily at the Vietnam Memorial Wall, which has just been amazing. The opportunity to connect with community, to give back to other veterans, to give back to their families. The opportunity to work with the Park Service, to work with park rangers has just been really has exceeded anything that I could imagine. To be there at the wall, when you are there at the wall with over 58,000 names, to have families and understand that each of those names represents a son, represents a daughter, represents a father, a classmate, and to hear their stories from the families that are there has really been amazing. And really to understand that and understand their sacrifice, their loss, and put it in a greater context of understanding our nation and our nation's history has just been just a super, super opportunity. So I encourage young folks, young people to volunteer to be a part of that. Most of the veterans at the wall are veterans, but please do not be dissuaded by that. You will just be really inspired and humbled by serving with such great people. And many of the volunteers are veteran, many are not. So you don't have to be a veteran to volunteer at the wall, at the Korean War Memorial, or at World War II as well. But just the opportunity to give back and to be connected with so many wonderful people has been humbling and inspiring.
Thank you so much, Keith, for sharing a little bit of your story. I think that for everyone joining today, it's my hope that everyone finds as much encouragement and wisdom in your story as I have. So thanks again for joining, and I'll circle back to you in just a minute with another question.
Thank you.
And my last speaker, I have the pleasure of introducing Sitara Nori Bashiri. She started out as a volunteer in the National Park Service, then became an intern at Cabrillo National Monument in California, and now is actually serving in a national leadership role in our Community Volunteer Ambassador Program, which I have the pleasure of getting to work on. So Sitara, it's very cool to get to have you on as a speaker today. Why don't you tell us just a little bit more about you and the Community Volunteer Ambassador Program and how it supports our Volunteers in Parks program?
Yes, absolutely. So hello to everyone who has joined. As Sherry mentioned, my name is Sitara Nori Bashiri. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I've been part of the Community Volunteer Ambassador Program for the last 3 years. My pathway to service started when I was in elementary school. I've grown up in San Diego, California, and would visit Cabrillo National Monument, a local national park here in San Diego, regularly in school field trips and family visits. And then I began volunteering at that park in college as a way to get some fresh air and tend to the park's community garden and learn more about the National Park Service. I've fallen in love with that park, and most importantly, many of its volunteers who sort of took me in and supported me with my many career aspirations. And I knew I wanted to continue working at that park and support its volunteer program. So shortly after graduating college, I applied for the Community Volunteer Ambassador Program there and spent about the next 2 years expanding the park's volunteer initiatives and supporting its staff and volunteers during the COVID-19 pandemic, and working with some incredible coworkers to build out meaningful projects that were centered on apprenticeships for local youth. In the last 2 years, this program has allowed me to learn so much more about the city that I live in, and to also learn that people connect very differently to nature, and how to make those spaces more accessible and welcoming for an increasingly wider audience. And this year, as I've continued with the program as a peer leader for our other 60+ interns around the country, I've gotten a chance to see my own professional growth and interests blossom, as well as the growth and interests of many of my peers. And I've gained some incredible connections and skills and points of view that I am very lucky to take with me wherever I go. One of the biggest benefits of working in this, in the Community Volunteer Ambassador program is that you can actually see the fruit of your labor. There's some incredible social and mental and physical and emotional benefits that come with volunteerism, not just for us and the people that we're around, but our communities as a whole. And so it's a sort of garden that you get to tend in your local community and oftentimes in very beautiful locations. So if any of this sounds appealing to you, I would encourage you to apply to the program. Applications to become a community volunteer ambassador in February of 2022 is now open until mid-December. I believe more information is about to get dropped into the chat to access the website and to learn more about the available locations from Florida to Saipan and to apply.
Thank you, Satara. It's such a pleasure to get to work with you and all of the community volunteer ambassador interns who actually help support the volunteer program in the National Park Service. So thanks for telling us a little bit of your story. All right, I've got 10 minutes before I need to shift us into Q&A. And so I'm going to ask very quick follow-up questions to our panelists. I have a follow-up question for Tyler, Natalie, Daphne, and Luke. You represent several different groups of youth volunteers. So starting with Daphne, if you want to join me on camera, I'd love to hear just a quick response from each of you. What did you learn in your experience volunteering in national parks? And did you walk away with any lessons learned or new skills?
I would say yes to all of those, you know, like having to organize so many community events, especially with like a government entity, has many different avenues to go about. So having to maybe learn like procedural stuff, gain some new leadership skills, organizational skills. You really have to gain new experience learning ins and outs of a different organization. And what was your second question?
Yeah, skills or lessons learned from your experience.
I think just the general experience, like you become a stronger person, you learn how to engage with a new set of people wherever you go. And, you know, we're communicating with visitors or different volunteers, you just start to build some new skills on how to address a whole new set of people.
Thanks, Daphne. I think that's some really good lessons learned. Luke, what about you?
I definitely learned a lot from my time working at Hopewell. I'd say one of the things that first was interesting to get used to, but it was the way, kind of like what Daphne was saying, with getting used to procedural things, you know, how a staff actually functions, because you visit a park, you see the staff or the volunteers, but you don't know what they're doing behind the scenes. But what is going on behind the scenes is I learned a lot about how much care is taken to what visitors might need, how much thought goes into, you know, trying to draw as many people to events as possible, making them as accommodating as possible. There's just such a commitment with everybody, I think, to, you know, like the sustainability, preservation, the history of the area. And with that, there's also a lot of self-learning. You kind of think about what's important to you and how you can convey that to others. So I learned a lot about, especially through visitor services, I learned a lot about interacting with people. You know, I remember specific instructions, like, you know, when you see a visitor, you know, ask if they've been here before, ask what you can do for them. And I know it seems like fairly simple, but it was, you know, it really instilled in me the fact that, you know, you're there to serve the community. You're not there to serve yourself. You're not there to serve anybody specifically. You're there to serve the community, to present this site, historic site, natural park, national park, whatever it might be, in a form that's honest with its history and that's honest with its natural setting. And I feel like that was really inspiring for me, and just all the people who worked there were incredible and had such a commitment that it was almost invigorating. I mean, how much they were all committed and how excited everybody was. It was really great.
That's really good to hear, Luke. And I'm sure my National Park Service colleagues appreciate hearing that as well. I think I can echo the admiration for the commitment to the role of public service and stewardship all across the National Park Service. Maybe Tyler and Natalie, if you have quick, maybe 30-second responses, go ahead and share just lessons learned, key takeaways.
Planning was the big one for me, going back and forth with people who knew the process inside and out, and just planning out all of the details even more so than I thought I could need was, I think, my biggest asset in executing a project successfully.
I think that makes a ton of sense, Tyler. And project planning is a huge skill and a really marketable one for you to be able to walk away with. Natalie, What about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of similar as Tyler. It was like crazy to plan a whole project. So just managing the project in general and bringing people together. And then also prior to my project, I didn't know a lot about bats. So I learned why they're good for the community and to create a stable ecosystem. And then for the Charles Young property itself, they knew the bats were in the area and they wanted to bring them together. So the houses provide a safe environment and place for all the bats.
Thank you, Natalie. I think that's an incredible lesson to walk away with as well. Some of the elements of a healthy ecosystem. Let me shift gears a little bit. So while we're thinking about the lessons learned while volunteering, I actually want to circle back to Keith. Keith, as a veteran who's volunteering as part of your second act, why would you, what would you tell these young people that they can expect to learn or to gain, and what should their motivation be?
Yeah, I think the learning piece is connecting with, in the case of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, connecting with veterans, connecting with their families, connecting with park rangers, with historians, and gaining a much better understanding and appreciation of American history. And history, not in the sense of what you read in books, our own history, connecting directly with veterans and their families and understanding their sacrifice and what they've done. I like to tell people, when you go to the Vietnam Wall, the first 3 panels are about 6 years. The next 3 panels are 6 weeks. When you begin to understand and appreciate the sacrifices of veterans and their families, it gives you a much better understanding and appreciation of our country and our country's history. And I think that's piece, and the connection piece, someone mentioned earlier, my volunteering has allowed me to connect with a much greater group of people, really more than veterans and their families, but folks and people in the Park Service, and to include people in government and other people in the military, and other volunteer organizations. So your world, you will grow, you will learn, you will be humbled, you will be inspired.
Thank you, Keith. And your final thought actually connects really well to a question that I wanted to ask Luke. You kind of, Keith, were talking about that lifelong learning and that lifelong connection. So Luke, building on what Keith just shared, how can we build that lifelong desire to support parks through volunteering? And how can partners like the Ice Age Trail Alliance help us do that?
Yeah, I think, starting them young, and like you said earlier, and really allowing that freedom of imagination and thought and exploration so that, people can find these places and fall deeply in love with them and start giving back on a local level, perhaps, and then growing from there. And what we do at the Ice Age Trail Alliance, with our about 3,000 pre-pandemic volunteers, really a lot of those are young folks. I was really thrilled to hear that 35 is the new young. And I just watched these people continue to come out and join us en masse and repeat. And it's because it's a safe place to be. It's welcoming to all. Our projects are extremely well planned and organized, so people know exactly where to go and they feel supported in that work. And then also providing training for our volunteers. So whether it's chainsaw safety training or first aid or how to build a stone wall, those are the things that we try to encourage them to expand their skill base and grow as individuals, while we are growing as a community of Ice Age Trail enthusiasts. And our partnerships that are just so critical to any of this. So whether we are partnering with one of our Ice Age Trail campuses or Ice Age Trail communities to connect these young folks to what we are doing as a volunteer-based organization, that is just those partnerships, we couldn't do it without them. And then on the other side, partners like the National Park Foundation, National Park Service help us have the mechanisms for getting this done. And it's whether it's paying for a bus to bring them all out, or providing them meals and the infrastructure needed during a volunteer event. Those partnerships really do create the community that we leverage to encourage people to come out over and over and again. And when they feel safe and connected and welcome and inspired, then they keep coming back. And so, thank you to our partners, the National Park Service, National Park Foundation, for helping make our vision a reality. So I'd say that's the way our partnerships integrate with keeping people engaged for the long haul.
Thank you. I think that's really great insights, and we are so grateful for the partnership, Luke. Let me end our panel discussion with one last question to one of our speakers. Satara, you've been involved in progressively responsible roles as a volunteer first, and then an intern, and now a peer leader role as an intern. So I think, let me just ask you to close us out. You've seen a lot of things. You've seen how volunteering works at lots of different parks now. What piece of advice would you give to people to make the most out of their volunteer service?
Yeah, so I would say actually start. Visit volunteer.gov for opportunities to volunteer near you. And if you find yourself in a position where transporting to a park or even time or potential barriers, or if there are any other needs that you may have, reach out to the parks you're interested in volunteering with, and ask them what opportunities they have that would be a good fit for you. And if you're already a volunteer, ask and try new things. Tell the people around you what you're interested in and what gets you excited, because no one knows you better than you know you. I had a wide variety of experiences as both a volunteer and intern, and I've been involved in projects that I never would have dreamed of being involved in until I saw that there was an availability. So I've wrote a children's book. I was able to monitor key species at a park and do community outreach and take photography classes and so much more, all centered around volunteerism. And then if you're between the ages of 18 to 30 or 18 to 35, if you're a veteran with an aspiration for a future in conservation stewardship and public service, I would highly, again, encourage you to apply for the Community Volunteer Ambassador Program. I believe I saw a question in the chat that said, do you have to be a California native to apply? No, you do not. There's CVA opportunities at a variety of different sites all throughout the country, including Hawaii, Guam, and Saipan, and you do not need to be a native of those areas to apply. So definitely check the chat for links to the application. And again, they're open until mid-December to be a part of the February cohort of Community Volunteer Ambassadors.
Thank you, Satara. I love that your first piece of advice was just do it. And that your second piece of advice was, if you're doing it, do it more or do it differently. I think that is fantastic and I love it. I am going to now transition us into our Q&A portion. We'll have about 30 minutes for this, and we're going to get through as many as we can. I am going to first ask a couple of questions that, let's see, Matt Carroll and Rachel Funk both put in similar questions, asking, I think this is a good question maybe for, let's try Natalie and Luke. The questions are really about how we as National Park Service staff can help volunteers like you gain skills so that it helps you gain experience, job, or a career. How can we make your volunteer experience worthwhile? Resume building, networking. What advice would you give to the National Park Service staff who work with youth volunteers? How can we make this a great experience for you? Natalie, Luke, do you have any thoughts?
I would say the best way, I think, for staff to help volunteers is just to kind of listen to them. If they're interested in something, see if that's an opportunity for them to get involved. I know that at Hopewell, the staff have been very accommodating. If there's been something I'm interested in, I'll tell them, or if not, they'll come seek me out. So I feel like there needs to be a kind of proactive approach, seeing what people are interested in, trying to keep them engaged and engaged in different avenues. Because you can do one thing, and I was kind of doing one thing for a while, but I feel like the more you do, the more depth of experience you gain. I feel like the more experience you have, the more you can kind of feel what you like, what you want to continue doing. And in that sense, you can connect with other people who are doing similar things, either at your park or another park that your park ranger will know about. And just I think the biggest piece of advice is just having an open ear and just proactively seeking to encourage different forms of volunteering based on the interest of the volunteer.
Thanks, Luke. I think that's really sound advice. Natalie, anything to add?
Yeah, I had a really good experience with the staff at the national parks. One thing I found my project on social media because they had some projects to do at the park. One thing they could do when they have these things they need to be completed is like reach out to Girl Scouts or even Boy Scouts, just certain organizations that they'd be able to find people to complete the projects through.
Thank you, Natalie. And I'll invite our other panelists, just in the interest of time, if you have additional thoughts on how the National Park Service can successfully help youth and young adults build their resumes, gain skills, and gain experience while volunteering, drop those in the chat so that we can keep the conversation flowing. I actually have a couple of other questions that I want to pin to people, and thanks George and Sarah and Keith Park for joining me back on screen for Q&A as well. I think that the next question actually might be a good one. This is from Haley Prado, who has a question about military transition into the National Park Service, both as a volunteer and as an employee. I will say that I don't think any of us can speak to the greatest advice probably about becoming an employee, since we are not representing our HR team. But I did want to first ask Keith, June, any advice from your transition from a military career to a volunteer role with the National Park? What are the major differences, and just what should they know as they make that transition?
Yeah, no, and I had a really great transition. I think I was actually walking across Independence Avenue. I was walking to the Martin Luther King Memorial and saw a volunteer and contacted the Park Service. And within a day or two, I actually sat down with a park ranger. I remember his name, Ranger Brism. He sat down for about 2 hours and kind of talked about the Park Service and asked me what I wanted to do. And they were extremely welcoming and accommodating. The Park Service does training every 2 years for the Vietnam Veteran Memorial volunteers, and I volunteer at other Park Service locations as well. But the transition was very easy. I think one of the challenges as a veteran is sort of structure, understanding how organizations, because pretty much anywhere you go will not be as structured. In a lot of ways, that's a good thing from the military. Just a great community, and understand that people will bring different strengths. I live in the Washington, D.C. area where we have, lots of retirees, lots of people that have worked in the State Department, Area ID, or other parts of government. So people bring just great skills. And, my recommendation would be to be open and to be willing to experience new things and new ways of looking at things. I think sometimes as veterans, you're in an organization, again, that's very structured, and you're kind of in an organization that maybe is not as structured, but, take the opportunity to really grow and learn and just be patient. But yeah, it's been an absolute blast. And I think the Park Service especially has been very accommodating and welcoming and helping you to transition.
Thank you, Keith. I appreciate that advice. And next, I actually have a couple questions that I'm going to bundle for Mr. George McDonald as our youth program lead. There were a few pre-submitted questions, George, just asking how folks can find out more about the different kinds of youth programs that are available. And they were wondering, is there a listserv or an email thread where we can find out about what's going on, what opportunities exist? How would you recommend people stay in touch with the opportunities that exist for youth at the National Park Service?
Sure. So I'm going to ask Lucy Holberg, who has put this whole session together, to just drop our link for our youth programs page on mps.gov into the chat. That's one of the best ways to find out. I would also say that we work with a lot of partner organizations. So through those partners, and we have some of those partners that are listed on our websites, like the YMCA, Boy Scouts of America, Girl Scouts of the United States of America, the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. Those are all major partners. And then they also have their own websites that also list a bunch of opportunities across the country. And then we also have, and a big part of what we do in our office is the work that we do with organizations known as Service and Conservation Corps, which they provide service in support of conservation projects on National Park Service lands. But these are actually work opportunities. So those are some other things that we do. And we call that program our 21st Century Conservation Service Corps program, or 21 CSC. So I would say going to our website is the quickest way. And then if you need to talk to somebody, I'll just share my telephone number, which is 301-646-4458. I'll say that again. That's my mobile, 301-646-4458. And my email is george_McDonald@mps.gov. And you can just drop me a direct email, and I'm more than willing to talk to you. I talk to people, thousands of people across the country, and this is what I do. I love doing it. And thank you to all the panelists and the speakers for all your service as well.
Thanks, George. I actually will kind of take a similar bundle question. We had a few questions, one from Allison Purcell, one from Allison Bell, asking about volunteer opportunities that we didn't highlight as much today. So one question was about, volunteer opportunities where you can serve remotely or virtually. And one is volunteer programs that could accommodate young people with special needs. And so we didn't highlight those today so much, but we do absolutely have virtual programs and programs that can accommodate special needs. And so I would encourage you to follow the same process to find a volunteer program. You can visit mps.gov/volunteer to learn more. And you can apply for a volunteer opportunity. You can actually search on our website for ones that are available remotely. And then if you have a park that you're interested in serving at and have special needs, I think contacting the park and explaining your situation and seeing what their needs are is the best opportunity. I know that a lot of our parks have been engaging youth even with special needs as for years now. And I think that we would love to continue that tradition. I think that, again, the virtual opportunities are an excellent fit. And as Luke Heilman actually was highlighting earlier, the National Park Service is absolutely committed to being able to create national park experiences for everyone. And so, again, even if you're not living in a place where a national park is nearby or you can't go to the national park, we'd love to consider being ways that we can get you engaged. Our next question, George, I'm not sure if you can answer this one, but maybe let me pitch it to you. There was a question about the NPS Pathways program, how to apply, what internships are part of it, and just where to find more information. I know we have some information, I think, on our website, but can you speak to any more details about the Pathways program and where they can get some information?
Sure. So the Pathways program is a federal government-wide program that targets people who are enrolled in accredited schools. You have to be enrolled in an accredited school, either high school, higher education. And these are for federal positions which are located on the usajobs.gov website. So if you go to that website and you just look for National Park Service and you punch in Pathways, you'll see a listing for all the Pathways positions. We also have other internship opportunities in addition to Pathways, which there are a lot in the National Park Service, but we also, through our service and conservation core programs, we also have internship programs in a wide variety of areas, such as in the hard sciences, in interpretation education. You can also do, we have vocational training programs such as the Traditional Trades Apprenticeship Program or the TTAP program, which is a 26-week vocational training program in the carpentry, brick masonry, stone masonry disciplines, focused on historic structures, which is a very specialized skill. But you can also find those opportunities also on our youth programs website. So we've got a ton of opportunities. We also expect to expand on those opportunities in the new year in 2022. So keep an eye out for that as well. And we also have internships that target various demographic groups, such as Native Americans, peoples with disabilities. We have a program that targets people who are deaf and hard of hearing. So there are also subcategories within our internship programs as well.
Thank you, George. It's so many opportunities to get involved. And I agree with you. I think sometimes the best way to get started is to do a little bit of research on the website and then reach out for more information. I actually saw a question from Brett Morgan, who's shared that they're wanting to develop a program at their park to have seniors at the high school come to the park to get on-the-job training. And they asked if anyone has particular experience with co-op programs with schools. They'd love to hear from you. None of our speakers specialize in that, but I will invite anyone. I wanted to verbally say it so that our other NPS staff who are on might be able to share some best practices, lessons learned for folks who have worked with co-op programs in schools. I wanted to respond to a question from Rebecca Slater, who shared that she's a teacher and a mom in the New York City metro area, and she's looking for volunteer opportunities for 16 to 17-year-olds, and said sometimes she's noticed that our volunteer opportunities are listed as 18 and up. We absolutely take younger volunteers, Rebecca, and I'm so delighted to hear that you're interested. I see Luke nodding and Natalie nodding. You know, I think some of our folks actually did get engaged before that 18 mark. And so I would recommend that if you're not finding anything online that you can apply to, that you contact the local park directly and ask what opportunities they have. I know that many of our parks, maybe Keith, you can actually speak to this a little bit. I'll pitch it to you in a minute, Keith Park. But I would say that I know that a lot of our parks that look to engage younger students below that 18 mark often do it on special event days as well when they have larger groups able to come, which if you're a teacher might work really well for you. So Keith, anything to add to what I shared?
Well, the thing that comes to mind immediately, and I'm not sure if we've mentioned Public Lands Day, but our park has hosted a number of Public Lands Day events with various age groups. Sometimes it's high school kids, sometimes it's families. So that, even though that only comes once a year, it's an opportunity, I think, to at least kind of get engaged with the park in some way. I answered a question, and I don't know, through the chat, I think, or the Q&A maybe, but somebody asked about ways to get involved or reach out to younger audiences. And we also, our park has an occasional, this pre-pandemic, we used to go to table at events, both park service and otherwise, also reaching out to the local schools in our community from grade school, middle school, and high school. So we often do that, basically just to kind of get ourselves out there. And something else I wrote in response to the Q&A was, I've met with principals of the local high school in that way, because sometimes students will go to them first because they're just the obvious, person to ask, either teachers or principals or whatever. And if we're in their minds, then they can suggest that to their students. So I think that's a good way to, kind of outreach as well.
Thank you, Keith. And there was another question. This one was actually submitted prior to our event that I wanted to ask about. It was also talking about younger volunteers. This question was, what are the best practices of working with schools, especially if they have community service hour requirements? And so I think I'll just ask any of our speakers today, if you getting engaged as a student have any lessons to share that are best practices for parks who want to work with high school students. I'll invite you to unmute in just a minute and share that. And then I also wanted to invite any park staff who are, or partners who already engage younger students who are volunteering in high school. Any best practices that you might want to share in the chat, feel free to do that. Any of our speakers have advice or lessons learned on best practices for engaging schools and students who have high school requirements?
I actually work at a school. It's a K through 12 school. So I see middle school, high school, elementary. And I would say, like, speaking to the counselors and having presentations on the impacts that these students can make in national parks would be really like interesting to students. I know if it was myself, even in college, and I saw like a NPS table, I would be very interested. So I think having presentations and explaining the impact that these students could make in national parks would be a great way to start getting like the message out there and just like networking to students.
That's great advice, Daphne. Anyone have anything to add before I move on to our next question?
I'll add from our perspective, it's about the relationships that we establish with the teachers. And we host something called an Educator Summit where we bring them out just to learn about how they can get involved, which then is a direct connection to the kids and the families. So it's much like we talk about building community within our volunteer ranks, it's the community within the teachers that bring these youth out to join us by the busload. So I think it really is going back to that marketing to them and making sure they know about the programs that are available locally, and then starting just the good old fashioned phone call with them and talking and seeing how we can work together.
Thanks, Luke. I think that's great advice. I think my next question I actually would love to target to Sarah, George, and myself. We got a couple of questions around how the National Park Service can do a better job of engaging more diverse and younger volunteers. And this is something that we as the National Park Service have been working on. One of our goals is to increase the diversity of people who get to visit and enjoy and invest in national parks. And I know that we're all trying to engage everyone in the United States to be able to enjoy their national parks. So why don't I pitch it to George or Sarah first, and then I'll chime in at the end. But any advice for parks who want to try to engage volunteers that maybe are historically underrepresented in their counts?
Yeah, this is a topic that I have been working on for many years. And I think one of the keys is that we need to do a better job, I think, in the National Park Service of really explaining the purpose for our national parks. These national parks are not just for certain people, they're for everyone. And there is a story and there is significance in just about every, in some park that targets some community or multiple parks that target different communities, different interests. And we have more than 400 different national park sites all over the country. And you can hear the stories of our country through these parks, and also the magnificent landscapes. And also, parks are great places for people to renew themselves, to get into nature, to feel, to reconnect with what's really important in life, which is really being happy. And this is what our parks are designed to do. So they're places for recreation, they're places to understand who we are as a country, as a people, to bring your family, to have fun, to have a smile on your face. And most parks that you go to, people are smiling because they're in these really happy spaces. And I think that we as a National Park Service need to do a better job of explaining that these are really nice places to be, and they're happy places.
Thanks, George. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that? I know the National Park Foundation has been an essential partner in our goal of reaching more people and getting them engaged in the parks.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. I'd love to share. Some of the things that immediately come to mind are obviously working with not only park, but park partners that, work so closely with their national park site. And some of the programs that the National Park Foundation provides to parks and partners. things like our Park Ventures program that focuses on engaging all folks, everyone, eliminating barriers, promoting access to enjoy recreational experiences, just like George was mentioning. So I think there's a strong partnership, obviously, between the foundation and the National Park Service, but also the partners that surround so many of our parks that offer programmatic opportunities that kind of expand upon, some of the more regular opportunities that we've currently seen, and really trying to expand what it means to be a participant in the outdoors. And I think George nailed it when we're talking about the goal of supporting broad and inclusive narratives that everyone belongs in the outdoors, and that we can eliminate barriers for communities who've been, maybe not have felt as welcome.
Hey, Sherry.
Thank you.
Sherry,
go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to answer this as well. And this forum has been great because I didn't know there was a Charles Young historic site. And I think that when communities engage with people who look like them and who engage with parts of their history. I was a volunteer, a National Park Service volunteer at the Frederick Douglass Historic Site, which is in Southeast DC. It's an underserved community, but it's wonderful. It's powerful. It's so impactful. And it's part of the total history of our nation. And I think when people see that and understand that, it helps them become involved. So I just think the ability to connect directly with underserved communities would help increase the number of the diversity of volunteers. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. I'm so glad you chimed in. And I love that you mentioned the Frederick Douglass House. That's actually near my home in DC and one of my favorite national park sites. And I actually am not going to add anything. All three of you that responded to this question, I think, did such an eloquent job of describing some of the ways that we can go about this. And I don't know that I can add anything to your words besides, as the volunteer representative for the volunteer program, I think the thing that we are working on more now is actually inviting volunteers who are from those local communities, which is what Keith was just saying, to volunteer. I think we realized just posting a volunteer opportunity online is not the same thing as partnering with a community to get them engaged. And so I've been so excited to see volunteer coordinators finding cool new ways to reach out to volunteers from their local communities to get involved, and volunteers who just weren't aware that there were so many neat opportunities to get engaged. With that, unfortunately, we are out of time. And so I'm going to have to stop the Q&A here, which I hate doing, but I know that we will do our best to try and answer some of these other questions in ways that we can. What I'm going to do is ask our volunteer speakers to just share 10 seconds or so of just a final parting thought and keep it really brief for us. But why don't I start with Keith June, actually. Keith, just a quick 20-second final parting thought around volunteering, particularly for youth and young adults in the National Park Service.
Yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity. You will be inspired. You will be humbled. Get fired up. I want to see you out there. Thank you.
I love it. And now, Kyle, final thoughts from Kyle Cloverdans. I'm sorry, Luke Cloverdans. Go right ahead, Luke.
I've been called worse. It's okay. Just that, never doubt that every day that we can get a young person into our parks could be just a life-changing day for them. And so take the time to follow their footsteps instead of asking them to follow yours.
I love it. Next, I'm going to go to Satara. Satara, final 10-second thought from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all hearing from a lot of different people today, from different backgrounds and different pathways to how they got where they are, and our pathways haven't ended there either. So like I mentioned, I always start my pathway from elementary school, and maybe even I should start younger, because that's where I can trace my earliest memories of enjoying the outdoors. And so your pathway to and in volunteer service is going to be different too. And totally unique and beautiful. And so my encouragement would be that your voice and experience is paramount to our public lands. So find where you are right now and just start there.
Love it. Daphne, final parting thoughts from you.
I think we can all agree that we love visiting national parks, historical, natural, and the best way to continue that relationship for other people is to volunteer and become the person that we love to see at the national park to help all visitors.
Daphne. Luke Heilman, what final parting thoughts do you have?
I would just encourage everybody to look for a national park near them and volunteer. I had no idea Hopewell existed before 2019. And when I looked up a local national park, I found it, and I'm so grateful for the experience. And I think everybody should look for a park near them or an opportunity with the Park Service, and you'll be surprised at how impactful it really is.
I think that was a great thought. Natalie, final parting thoughts from you.
Yeah, I encourage anyone listening to get involved if you're not already. You'd learn a lot more than you expect, and I definitely did. So.
Love it. And we're so glad that you did, Natalie. And finally, I'll end with Tyler Rush. Tyler, parting thoughts from you.
Yeah, if you're having trouble finding a place to start, either go local or find something that really inspires you and gets you fired up, and just volunteer there and watch that change your relationship with that place.
Love it. Thank you. And thank you again to each of our speakers and our panelists for sharing your stories and your wisdom. And to everybody who's been listening, thank you for attending. We encourage you to visit nps.gov to get involved as a volunteer with the National Park Service or to learn more about our youth opportunities. You should be able to see in just a moment some on-screen contact information. And if you want to send any comments or questions about today's event, you can email us at npsyouth@nps.gov. And just a reminder, a link to the event recording will be available on our event page following the event and on our Facebook page. And thank you all again for joining today, and have a great afternoon and evening.